Wyoming Territory, July 1887, the wind howled across the empty plains as thunder cracked in the distance. But the real storm was in the barn loft where Georgia Zeller was hiding, heart hammering, lungs tight with fear. She pressed back against the hay bales, her dress torn at the hem, grit smeared along her cheek. Below her, the barn door creaked open. She held her breath, clutching the small knife she had swiped off the kitchen table before running. But it wasn't her stepfather's boots she heard, it was a slower, heavier tread, calm, steady. A man's voice called up, low and sure. "I know someone's up there. You are not in trouble. I am here to help." Georgia didn't move. She had learned the hard way not to trust kindness. But then lightning lit up the crack between the boards and she caught a glimpse of the man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a brown trail coat soaked through at the shoulders. He looked up, eyes sharp and clear. "My name is Kade Ashford. This is my ranch. You are safe here. Safe." She almost laughed. There hadn't been a safe place since her mama died last winter and left her in the hands of Horace, a man with too much temper and too many debts. She stayed quiet, but Kade did not leave. Instead, he leaned against a post and waited, rain pounding the roof over his head. "I brought food," he said after a long moment, setting a wrapped bundle on the floor. "I will be back in the morning. If you are gone by then, I will not chase you, but you can stay if you want." He left just like that, no questions, no threats. When dawn came, Georgia was still there. By daylight, the Ashford homestead looked different. The main house stood not far from the barn, sun-bleached wood and smoke curling from the chimney. A corral stretched out to the west, horses moving quietly inside. She spotted a chicken coop and a pump near the back porch. The ranch was lived in but not messy. Cared for. She stepped down from the loft, the food bundle clutched to her chest. Her stomach churned with hunger, but her pride held firm. She would not beg. Kade was feeding a dapple gray mare, his sleeves rolled back to his elbows. He looked over when she moved and gave a small nod. No surprise, no smile. "You stayed." She nodded once. "Just for a little while. You got a name?" Georgia hesitated. "Georgia." He did not push for more, just said, "You can wash up out back." "After that, I could use help with the chickens." "What do you want in return?" she asked, wary. Kade's eyes locked on hers. "Nothing you do not want to give." It was the first time in months she had been offered anything without a price. Georgia worked hard. She cleaned stalls, collected eggs, swept the porch, and helped cook when she could. She didn't talk much, and neither did Kade, but their silences were not heavy. They moved around each other with an ease that grew day by day. At night, she slept in the loft still, though he offered her the small guest room in the house. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch steps. Georgia held a cup of coffee, legs pulled up beside her. Kade leaned back, hat tipped low. "You running from someone?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer for a long time. Then, "My stepfather. After my mama passed, it got bad. He drinks, yells. Last week he tried to." She stopped. Her hand trembled slightly. "You do not have to say more," Kade said, voice rough. She looked at him then. "You could turn me in," he shook his head. "You are not a criminal. You are a girl who deserves peace." The next few days passed in a rhythm: quiet mornings, long hours of work, supper by the fire. One night she laughed, really laughed, at something he said about a stubborn mule. Kade blinked like he had not heard a sound like that in a long time. "You should laugh more," he said. She looked away, her cheeks warm. "I forgot how. You are remembering." That night she did not go back to the loft. She stood in the doorway of the house while he banked the fire. "Is the guest room still open?" she asked. He just nodded, then paused. "You do not owe me anything, Georgia." "I know," she whispered. 3 days later, Horace found her. Kade was out mending fence lines. Georgia was kneeling by the firewood pile when the horse galloped into the yard. She knew the rider, knew the twisted sneer and the way he slid off the saddle, already shouting, "You think you can run from me, girl? You think some ranch hand's gonna keep me from what's mine?" She backed away, hands shaking, but Horace grabbed her arm hard. "You are coming home." She tried to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth. Then came the sound of hooves hard and fast, and Kade appeared like a storm. He leapt from the saddle, pulling Horace off her in one clean motion. They hit the dirt hard. Kade did not shout. He moved with purpose, striking once, twice, until Horace rolled away coughing. "She is not yours," Kade said, his voice like stone. "You come back here and I will bury you myself." Horace spat blood, eyes wild, but he saw something in Kade that made him retreat. He climbed back onto his horse and rode off. Georgia stood frozen, her breath ragged. Kade looked at her, jaw tight. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, not this time." He stepped closer slowly and reached for her hands. "You are safe now, I promise." And for the first time she believed it, she leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, not hard. Not possessive. Just shelter, warm, steady, and real. Georgia buried her face in his chest and let herself cry. She had found shelter in a cowboy's arms, and she did not want to leave. The days after Horace's departure settled into a quieter rhythm, though something between Georgia and Kade had shifted in those still moments after the dust cleared. She didn't speak of it, and neither did he, but the weight of what had almost happened hung between them, not heavy, only present, like the scent of rain long after the storms passed. One morning, she stood at the window of the guest room, holding back the curtain with 2 fingers. The sky was pale, the sun not yet strong enough to burn off the last of the fog. Kade was out by the east fence, checking the wire with a pair of pliers tucked into his belt. His coat hung open, shirt rolled to the elbows, hands steady as he worked. A knock came at her doorframe. She turned. He held a pair of folded trousers threadbare at the knees. "Would you mend these?" he asked. "Only if you've got the patience for it." She took them without a word and brushed her thumb over the worn cloth. "I'll have them by supper." When he handed her the trousers, his fingers brushed hers. Neither of them looked away, but the moment passed quiet as ever. She stitched them by the light of the window, her needle moving in rhythm with the ticking of the mantel clock. Outside, the wind stirred the dry grass. The world had turned softer since that day, but not simpler. Later, they sat beside the root cellar while Kade inspected a broken hinge on the door. Georgia passed him nails as he worked. "Why do you stay alone out here?" she asked without looking at him. He didn't answer at once. "Wasn't always alone. My brother and I built this place together. He took a bullet in Dodge 6 years back. After that, I didn't see much point in town life." She glanced over. "And your folks? Gone long before the war. We drifted west after Appomattox, just us 2. She nodded, tucking that away. "You ever think about selling off? Starting fresh somewhere else?" "I did once," he said, setting the hammer down. "But this land's seen too much of me now. I'd rather mend fences than start over." She liked the way he said it, not proud, just certain, like the land knew him and he knew it back. That evening, she laid the mended trousers on the kitchen table, folded neat. He glanced at the stitching, then at her. "You've got a steady hand," he said. "I used to make all my mama's aprons." She was particular. He waited a moment, then asked, "What was she like?" Georgia hesitated, then pulled a chair out and sat. "She had a sweet tooth, would sneak molasses even when flour was scarce, sang while she cleaned. Never raised a hand even when she should have." Kade leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "She'd be proud of you." "I don't know," she said softly. "I ran, you endured," he countered. "That's different." They didn't speak after that, but the stillness didn't need words. The next morning, Kade took her out past the far ridge where the cattle grazed. Misra, his bay gelding, carried them both. She sat behind him, hands fisted in the back of his coat, her cheek brushing his shoulder whenever the horse jolted forward. "Why are we out here?" she asked as he slowed the horse near a small rise. He dismounted and reached up for her hand, helping her down. "Wanted you to see the creek that runs through the north end. Water's low this time of year, but it'll rise come September." They walked along the bank, boots sinking into the soft earth. A hawk circled overhead, casting shadows on the tall grass. "You planning to keep me?" she asked suddenly, voice too low to carry far. He stopped. "You want to be kept?" She stared at the water, its surface broken by wind. "I don't know what I want. I've never had the choice before." Kade took a step closer, not touching, just near enough she could feel the heat of him. "You've got one now." She looked up at him, and something in his face open, steady, made her chest tighten. "I don't know how to be with someone," she whispered. "Not without being afraid." "I'll wait as long as you need," he said. "And if you decide you'd rather go, I won't stop you." Her throat closed around something too big to name. She nodded, unable to speak. That night she stood in the kitchen drying dishes while he stoked the fire. When she passed him the last plate, their hands touched again, and this time she didn't move away, he didn't either. And that was enough for now. Kade found her down by the root cellar after supper, hands buried in the dirt between the garden rows. She'd pulled her hair back with a strip of feed cloth and rolled her sleeves to the elbow, forearms smudged with soil. The sun had long dipped below the ridge, but she kept working, her fingers moving slow and methodical through the dry earth. "You aiming to plant all that tonight?" he asked, stepping near. Georgia sat back on her heels. "Couldn't sleep if I tried. Thought I'd give the carrots another chance. Ground's still too hard." He crouched beside her. "We can haul more water in the morning." "Help it turn soft." She nodded, brushing her thumb across her brow. "You ever think about selling some of the extra come harvest?" He rested his arms on his knees. "Wouldn't know how to price it. I trade a little feed in town, but that's as far as I've gone. My mama used to keep ledgers." She could stretch flour like a preacher stretches truth. Kade's eyes flicked to the edge of her mouth. "You're good with numbers," she shrugged. "Better with rows and lists than with people. You've done fine with me." "That's different," she said, quiet. He waited, but she didn't add to it. "Wouldn't mind letting you run the books," he said. "If you're willing." "I'd like that." They walked back to the house in easy silence, fireflies rising from the damp grass. Georgia held her hand out once, catching one in her palm. She didn't say anything, just watched it blink once, twice, and then let it go. Inside, she lit the lamp while Kade removed his boots. The air still held warmth, but the edge of autumn had begun to creep into the nights. "I want to stay," she said suddenly, her back to him. He stood still beside the hearth, one boot in hand. "You sure?" She turned. "I know what I want now," he nodded once slowly. "You'll stay in the house then, not the guest room, mine." Her breath caught, not from fear but something steadier. She stepped toward him. "I won't be afraid of sharing a bed, not with you." "I won't touch what's not offered," he said, voice low. "I'm offering." Kade reached for her hand and she let him take it. His grip was warm, calloused, and sure. No hesitation, no rush. That night, she lay beside him beneath the patched quilt, her back to his chest, his arm resting lightly across her middle. The wind moved through the cottonwoods outside, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't wake when it rattled the eaves. In the gray light of morning, she slipped out of bed and pulled on her dress. Kade was still breathing deep, one arm tucked beneath his head. She stared at him for a long moment, then moved to the kitchen to start coffee. When he joined her, boots laced, hair still damp from the pump, he leaned in and pressed his lips to her temple. No words, just that. Later, while she scrubbed the porch steps, he returned from the barn with a wooden crate tucked under his arm. "Something came for you," he said, setting it down. She wiped her hands and opened the lid. Inside lay a blue calico bundle, frayed at the corners but carefully wrapped, her mother's apron, her ledger book, a folded letter. "Miss Lucinda at the mercantile said it was dropped by a woman from the circuit wagon," he explained. "Said she'd been holding it until she knew where to send it." Georgia ran her fingers over the fabric, then opened the ledger. Familiar loops and flourishes met her eyes, the neat columns of her mother's handwriting. "She used to hum when she wrote," she said, voice catching. The same 3 notes over and over. Kade didn't speak. He just settled beside her on the step, their knees touching. She kept records of everything, even the weight of the lye soap. "You can use it, keep track of what's ours now." She looked up, tears gathering but not falling. "Is it ours?" He met her gaze. "If you want it to be." Georgia closed the book and set it gently in her lap. "Then yes, I do." That evening they worked side by side in the pasture, fixing a slat on the east fence. She held the rail steady while he hammered, When it was done, he didn't move back. Just stood close, both hands resting on the top rail, eyes on hers. "Never thought I'd build a life with someone again," he said. "You're not alone in that." "I want to marry you, Georgia, if you'll have me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached up and brushed his hair back from his brow with a tenderness she hadn't known she was capable of. "You already have me," she said. "But yes, I'd like to be your wife." They kissed there with the scent of hay and sun-warmed wood all around them. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't timid. It was the kind of kiss that settles into the bones and stays there, the land stretched wide around them. Quiet, unmoving, and theirs. The church bell in Laramie rang long and low, its sound carried west by a gust that bent the cottonwoods behind the Ashford house. Georgia stood at the back fence, fingering the edge of her shawl, eyes on the horizon where the road curved out of sight. Kade had gone to meet a neighbor about a team of mules. He'd offered to take her, but she'd declined. The idea of town still pressed against her chest too tight. She turned back toward the house, dust lifting beneath her boots, and made her way inside. The kitchen was quiet, the stove warm from the morning fire. On the table sat a folded square of muslin, the hem of a dress she'd started altering 2 nights earlier. It was too fine for everyday wear, but she liked the feel of the fabric, the way it held the scent of dried lavender from the chest where Kade's mother once stored linens. She took up needle and thread and worked without speaking, the only sound the ticking of the shelf clock and the distant cluck of hens. By the time she finished the seam, the sun had shifted past noon. She washed her hands at the basin, then stepped outside, drying them on her apron. A rider approached from the south, not Kade. This one wore a flat-brimmed hat and a clean blue coat. Georgia narrowed her eyes as he slowed his horse and tipped his head. "Afternoon, ma'am. I'm looking for Kade Ashford." "He's not here," she said, keeping one hand on the pump handle. The man dismounted, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Name's Everett Calloway. I'm sent from the circuit judge down in Rawlins. Got paperwork for Mr. Ashford to sign." Georgia stepped down from the stoop, cautious. "What kind of paperwork?" "Land registry updates." "He's been petitioning for water rights. Looks like it went through." She nodded once. "You can leave it with me." Calloway hesitated. "It's best I hand it to him direct. He'll be back before sundown." The man studied her a moment, then tethered his horse and leaned against the porch rail. "Mind if I wait?" Georgia didn't like having a stranger linger, but there wasn't cause to refuse. She handed him a cup of water and left him on the porch while she returned to the kitchen. Through the window, she kept watch. He didn't speak again, just sat with his hat tipped low, watching the road. When Kade returned, the sun already beginning to stretch shadows long across the yard, he nodded once at the visitor, then turned to Georgia. "Everything all right," man's from the judge. "Something about the creek rights." Kade stepped up to the porch, shook hands with Calloway, and took the papers. He didn't ask questions, just read each line with care, then signed. After the man rode off down the road, Kade stood by the well, reading over the last page again. "Means we don't have to worry about them damming the water east of the ridge," he said. "It's ours now, guaranteed." Georgia stepped closer. "You've been fighting for that since before winter. Didn't think it would matter then." "Does now." She watched his eyes, the way they softened when he looked at her. "Because of me." He didn't answer directly. "Because I'm building something worth keeping." They stood a long while in the yard, the smell of cut hay drifting in from the barn. A flicker of motion caught Georgia's eye, a fox darting along the edge of the field, its body low and quick. She watched it vanish into the grass. After supper, she took the dress she'd finished and stepped into the bedroom they now shared. Kade was at the washstand, wiping dust from his collar. She held up the dress without speaking. He turned, took it in, and nodded slowly. "You planning to wear that somewhere?" "Thought I might," she said. "If we're to be married, I'd rather not do it in barn clothes." He crossed the room, took her face in his hand, and brushed his thumb beneath her cheekbone. "Tomorrow," she nodded, "I'll ride into town before light. Reverend Cooper owes me a favor." She reached up and rested her palm against his chest. "I don't want a crowd. You'll have just me." That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening to the faint rustle of night birds outside the window. Kade's breathing beside her was slow and deep. She turned toward him, laying her hand lightly over his. He shifted in his sleep and laced his fingers through hers. No words, no promises spoken aloud, but it was there all the same. In the morning he left early, just as he'd said. She watched from the window, her dress hung over the wardrobe door, the hem catching the pale gold light. The church in Laramie stood quiet in the early morning, its whitewashed siding softened by the haze that clung low to the ground. Georgia stepped from the wagon in the dress she'd sewn by hand, her boots cleaned and polished as best she could manage. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and horses, but she barely noticed. Her hands were steady, her breath even. Kade stood waiting beneath the front gable, one hand resting on the hitching rail. He wore his Sunday coat, the one with the worn elbows, freshly brushed and buttoned proper. Beneath his hat, his eyes found hers, steady and warm. She walked to him without speaking. He offered his arm, and she took it. Inside, the pews sat empty save for the Reverend's wife, who had agreed to witness. The old woman gave Georgia a nod that held no judgment, only quiet approval. Reverend Cooper stood ready beneath the front window, the morning light casting long beams across the dusty floorboards. Kade didn't shift or fidget. Georgia didn't either. When the vows were spoken, they were said simply, without flourish. No flowers, no music. Just the sound of two voices meeting halfway, each word meant. When it was done, they signed the register. The Reverend offered a blessing, brief and low. Outside, the wind had picked up. Kade helped her back into the wagon, his hand lingering just a moment longer at her waist. They rode home side by side, the wheels creaking softly beneath them. Back at the ranch, the hens scattered as they pulled into the yard. Georgia stepped down, gathering her skirt as she walked toward the house. Kade followed, carrying the parcel the Reverend's wife had pressed into their hands, a tin of preserves and a cloth-wrapped loaf of sour bread. Inside, the house felt different. Not changed exactly, but more complete. The table was set with their best plates, and a small bundle of late summer hollyhocks, clipped from behind the root cellar, stood in a jar at the center. Georgia hadn't asked for them. Kade had gone out early. After they ate, she stood at the sink rinsing their cups. He came up behind her, fingers brushing her arm. "You tired?" he asked. "No, just still," he nodded, leaning against the door frame. "We could drive out to the North Ridge tomorrow, take the horses. I packed a sack cheese, biscuit, little smoked meat." "Thought you might like it." "I would." She turned then, drying her hands. "I like that you thought of it. I think of you more than I say." "Then say it now." He reached for her, pulling her toward him. "I love you, Georgia. I've loved you since you looked me in the eye and asked what I wanted in return." Her breath caught, but not from surprise. "And I've loved you since you said nothing I didn't choose to give." That night they lay together without hesitation, limbs tangled beneath the quilt, the quiet of the plains folding around them. Outside, the wind softened, and the stars scattered above the roof like seeds on dark soil. Seasons turned. By the following spring, the garden stretched twice as wide. Georgia had added potatoes and pole beans, tracked every yield in her mother's ledger, now worn at the corners from use. Kade built her a small table beside the kitchen window, where she kept the book and a tin of writing charcoal. She did the accounts, he did the field work, and neither kept count of who did more. They rode into town once a week. Georgia no longer kept to the wagon. She walked beside Kade through the mercantile and nodded to Miss Lucinda without flinching. She sold eggs, started baking bread for the circuit riders who passed through. She spoke little, but when she did, folks listened. One warm afternoon, Kade came in from the barn with a wrapped bundle and placed it on the table. "You didn't need to do that," Georgia said, eyeing the folded cloth. "You've outgrown that apron," he said. "Figured you ought to have one of your own." She opened it slowly. The fabric was sturdy, deep green with a single pocket stitched at the hip. "It's good work," she said, running her fingers along the seam. Hired a girl in town to help me with the sewing. I'm no hand with a needle. Georgia looked up, her eyes soft. I love it. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I love you, she smiled then, full and unguarded. I know. By the time autumn came again, the ranch had grown. They added 2 calves, a new coop, and a stovepipe in the bedroom to cut the cold. Kade built a cradle in the workshop, though neither of them spoke of it yet. Georgia lined it with soft cotton just in case. One evening, as frost crept up the windows and the fire burned low, Kade sat carving by lamplight. Georgia rested in the chair beside him, her feet tucked beneath a quilt. You ever think you'd end up here? He asked. No, she said, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else. He set down his knife, looked at her. You think you'll stay with me come what may? She leaned her head against his shoulder. I already did. And in the still, firelit quiet, with the land settled around them and the past long behind, they stayed, together, always.